There are moments in life that arrive disguised as small talk. Ordinary exchanges that seem forgettable in the instant they happen, only to reveal themselves later as the hinge on which everything afterward would turn. Daniel Foster would remember, years later, that the moment which changed his life had begun with something that sounded almost like a joke. Daniel was 38, a set designer who had spent nearly 2 decades working backstage in community and regional theaters. The kind of quiet craftsman whose work supported the visible magic without ever stepping into the spotlight himself. Gray had begun to thread through his dark hair, though he barely noticed it, too absorbed most days in blueprints, lumber, and the particular satisfaction of building something from nothing. That evening, he was working late at the Meridian Theater, adjusting a set piece for the following week's production, when he first noticed the little girl standing near the orchestra pit, holding something small and golden in her cupped hands. She couldn't have been more than 8, with curly brown hair and an expression of careful concentration as she examined whatever object she held. Daniel recognized her, vaguely, as the daughter of Patricia Ashford, the theater's newest award chair, a woman whose reputation as a business executive had preceded her arrival by several weeks. "Careful there," Daniel said gently, noticing the girl was standing quite close to the edge of the pit. "That's a long way down if you're not paying attention to your feet." The girl looked up, startled, then stepped back with the kind of immediate compliance that suggested she'd been raised to take safety warnings seriously. "Sorry," she said. "I was looking at my compass." "May I see it?" Daniel asked, genuinely curious now, drawn by the careful way she held the object, as if it carried more weight than the small size suggested. She extended her hands, revealing an antique brass compass, its surface worn smooth by years of handling. The kind of object that clearly carried history rather than mere decoration. "This is beautiful," Daniel said, examining it without touching, aware that some objects deserve to remain in their owner's hands. "Where did you get this?" "It was my dad's," the girl said, and something in her voice shifted, carrying a weight that seemed too heavy for someone so young. "He died before I was born. My mom gave it to me for my birthday. She said he always carried it, even though he had, like, phones and stuff that could tell direction. She said he liked how it felt in his hands." Daniel felt something settle in his chest, a recognition he understood too well from his own history. "That sounds like a very special gift," he said quietly. "What's your name?" "Sophie," she said. "Sophie Ashford. I'm Daniel. I build the sets here. Make sure everything looks right for the shows." Sophie's expression brightened slightly. "Did you build the castle?" "For the play last month." "I did," Daniel said, smiling at the memory of that particular project, one of his favorites. "Did you see it?" "My mom brought me. It was really good. I liked how the tower could actually move." Before Daniel could respond, a voice called from across the stage, sharp with the particular urgency of a parent who had briefly lost track of a child. "Sophie, Sophie, where'd you go?" Patricia Ashford appeared around the edge of the set pieces, her expression shifting from concern to relief as she spotted her daughter standing safely beside Daniel. Patricia was 42, dressed in the kind of tailored business attire that suggested she'd come directly from board meetings to theater business without pause between the two. She was, by all accounts Daniel had her, brilliant and demanding, having built her family's modest business into a significant regional company through sheer determination after her husband's death had left her a young widow with an infant daughter and a fledgling company few had expected to survive. "There you are," Patricia said, relief evident in her voice as she reached her daughter. "I told you to stay by the seats." "I was just looking at things," Sophie said, the universal defense of curious children everywhere. "This is Daniel. He builds the sets." Patricia's eyes moved to Daniel with the assessing quality of someone accustomed to quickly evaluating people and situations. "Thank you for keeping an eye on her," she said, though something in her tone carried more formality than warmth. "She was just showing me her compass," Daniel said. "It's a beautiful piece." Something flickered across Patricia's face. Grief, perhaps, or the particular tenderness that comes from watching your child treasure a connection to someone she never had the chance to know. "It belonged to my husband," she said quietly. "Sophie's father. He passed away in a car accident 6 months before she was born." "I'm sorry," Daniel said, meaning it. recognizing in her expression the particular loneliness of a loss that never quite finishes announcing itself, that keeps arriving in new forms as the years accumulate. "Thank you," Patricia said, then seemed to shake herself slightly, as if unwilling to linger too long in that emotional territory in front of a relative stranger. "We should let you get back to your work. Sophie, come on. We need to head home. Can I stay and watch him build things?" Sophie asked, her expression carrying the particular hopefulness of a child who has found something genuinely interesting. "Sweetheart, Mr." Patricia paused, realizing she didn't know his surname. "Foster," Daniel supplied. "Daniel Foster. Mr. Foster has actual work to do. We shouldn't intrude on his evening." "I don't mind," Daniel said, surprising himself slightly with how quickly he offered this. "I'm just doing some adjustments to the set piece for next week's show. She's welcome to watch, if you don't need to rush off." Patricia hesitated, glancing between her daughter's hopeful expression and whatever calculations were running through her mind. The schedule she likely needed to keep, the appropriate boundaries between board chair and staff, the simple exhaustion of raising a child alone while running a demanding business. "If you're certain it's no trouble," she said finally. "None at all," Daniel assured her. What followed was perhaps 20 minutes of Sophie watching with genuine fascination as Daniel explained the mechanics of the rotating set piece. How counterweights and pulleys created the illusion of a castle tower moving seemingly by magic. How theater relied on careful engineering hidden behind visible artistry. Patricia stood nearby, ostensibly checking messages on her phone, though Daniel noticed her attention kept drifting back to the conversation between him and her daughter. "You're good with her," Patricia said eventually, once Sophie had wandered a little further off to examine some props, still within sight, but occupied with her own curious exploration. "I have a nephew about her age," Daniel said. "I suppose I've had some practice explaining things to curious children." "Sophie doesn't usually take to new people so quickly," Patricia said, something like surprise coloring her voice. "She's normally quite reserved around adults. She doesn't know. Maybe she sensed I wasn't going to rush her away from something she found interesting," Daniel offered. Patricia looked at him more carefully then, as if reassessing something in her initial read of him. "That's probably it," she said quietly. They talked a while longer, the conversation drifting from theater business to more personal territory. Patricia mentioning the challenges of running her company while raising Sophie alone. Daniel sharing something of his own history, how he'd found unexpected peace in theater work after leaving a more conventional career path that hadn't suited him. "It must be hard," Daniel said carefully, "managing everything alone. The business, raising Sophie, all of it." Patricia's expression shifted, something guarded entering her eyes. "We manage," she said, the particular deflection of someone unaccustomed to acknowledging difficulty, even when the difficulty was evident to any observer paying attention. "I don't doubt that," Daniel said gently. "I just imagine it takes considerable strength." Patricia seemed to consider this, some of the guardedness softening slightly. "Some days more than others," she admitted, then seemed to catch herself, surprised, perhaps, at having revealed even this much vulnerability to someone she'd known less than an hour. It was in this context, this unexpected moment of connection between a widow who rarely let her guard down and a set designer who had somehow made both her and her daughter feel comfortable enough to linger, that Patricia made the comment that would echo through the following months. "You know," she said, half joking but with an undertone that suggested something more sincere beneath the lightness, "my daughter needs a father like you. Someone patient, who takes time to explain things, who doesn't rush children away from their curiosity." The comment hung in the air between them, carrying more weight than either had perhaps intended in the moment of its utterance. Daniel felt something complicated move through him. Surprise at the directness, certainly, but also something else. A recognition of possibility that seemed too significant to dismiss as mere pleasantry. He considered his response carefully, aware that whatever he said next would either close this unexpected door or open it further. "I think," he said slowly, "that any child would be fortunate to have a mother like you. Someone who built a business from nothing while grieving, who clearly put Sophie's well-being before everything else, who raised a daughter curious and kind enough to hold on to her father's compass like it's the most precious thing in the world." Patricia's eyes widened slightly, clearly not expecting this response. something shifting in her expression that suggested his words had landed somewhere unexpected and significant. She started, then seemed to lose her words entirely. An unusual occurrence, Daniel suspected, for a woman known for her decisive articulation in business settings. I don't say that to be flattering, Daniel continued, feeling emboldened now by having begun this honest exchange. I say it because in the short time I've spent with Sophie tonight, I can see how much love and stability you've given her, despite circumstances that would have broken many people. That compass she's holding, the way she talks about her father even though she never knew him, that comes from you creating space for that connection to matter, even in his absence. Patricia was quiet for a long moment, her composed executive demeanor momentarily suspended, replaced by something more vulnerable, more genuinely present. No one has said something like that to me in a very long time, she said finally, her voice softer than Daniel had yet heard it. Most people just see the business success, or they see the tragedy. They don't often see the actual work of raising a child alone while trying to keep a company afloat. I imagine it's easy for people to see the outcome without appreciating the effort, Daniel said. Success can make struggle invisible to observers who only see results. Yes, Patricia said, something like relief entering her voice at being understood in this particular way. Exactly that. Sophie returned to them at this point, having apparently satisfied her curiosity about the props, and the conversation shifted back to lighter territory, though something had changed in the underlying dynamic between the two adults, a recognition, perhaps, that they'd stumbled into a moment of genuine connection neither had anticipated. We really should head home, Patricia said eventually, though her tone carried less urgency than her earlier attempts to extract Sophie from the theater. Sophie has school tomorrow. Of course, Daniel said. It was wonderful meeting you both. Can we come back? Sophie asked, looking between her mother and Daniel with obvious hope. I want to see how the other sets work, too. Patricia glanced at Daniel, something questioning in her expression, as if seeking permission, or perhaps confirmation that this invitation would be welcome. I'd like that, Daniel said, addressing both mother and daughter. You're welcome anytime, as long as I'm not disrupting a rehearsal. What began as that unexpected evening conversation gradually evolved into a pattern over the following weeks. Patricia would bring Sophie to the theater on evenings when board business brought her there anyway, and Sophie would seek out Daniel, curious about his current projects, patient in her questions, gradually building the kind of comfortable familiarity that comes from repeated positive interaction. Daniel found himself looking forward to these visits more than he initially acknowledged, even to himself. There was something in Sophie's genuine curiosity, her careful way of holding her father's compass as if it connected her to a history she'd never directly experienced, that touched something in him he hadn't realized needed touching. And Patricia gradually began to let her guard down further, sharing more of the actual difficulty behind her business success. The sleepless nights during the company's early struggling years, the guilt she sometimes felt about time spent working rather than with Sophie, the particular loneliness of major decisions made without a partner to share the weight. Everyone assumes because I'm successful now, everything must have been straightforward, she told Daniel one evening, several weeks into their growing acquaintance, while Sophie occupied herself examining a new set piece nearby. They don't see the years I spent essentially failing forward, making mistakes, nearly losing everything multiple times before finding stability. That's usually how real success works, Daniel said. The visible outcome hides the invisible struggle that made it possible. You understand that better than most people I encounter, Patricia said, something like appreciation coloring her voice. Most of my board members, my business associates, they see numbers and outcomes. They don't think about the human cost of building something from nothing. I think that's partly why I found peace in theater work, Daniel said. Everything here is about creating illusion through visible effort. You can see the work that goes into making magic happen. There's an honesty in that, even when the final product is meant to transport audiences beyond ordinary reality. Their conversations gradually deepened, touching on grief and resilience, on the particular challenge of building a meaningful life after loss, on the ways children absorb and reflect the emotional environment their parents create even when parents try to shield them from difficulty. One evening, several months into this developing friendship, Patricia arrived at the theater looking particularly exhausted, the kind of bone-deep tiredness that spoke of accumulated stress rather than simple lack of sleep. "Difficult day?" Daniel asked, noting the tension in her shoulders as she settled into a seat near the stage while Sophie went to find her usual spot near Daniel's current project. "Difficult month," Patricia admitted, something in her guard slipping further than usual. "We're facing some significant challenges with a major contract renewal, and I've been working nearly around the clock trying to secure it. I feel like I've barely seen Sophie properly in weeks, despite technically being present." "That sounds exhausting," Daniel said, settling into the seat beside her rather than immediately returning to his work. "Do you want to talk about it? Or would you rather have a distraction from thinking about it?" Patricia looked at him with something like surprise, as if unaccustomed to being offered this particular choice. This consideration of what she might actually need rather than simply what needed to be discussed or solved. "I think," she said slowly, "I'd like a distraction actually. I've been thinking about this contract situation constantly, and I could use some space from it." "Well," Daniel said, considering options, "I could tell you about the time I accidentally built an entire castle wall backwards during my first year doing this work, requiring us to rebuild it entirely 3 days before opening night." Patricia laughed, genuine and warm, the first truly relaxed sound Daniel had heard from her that evening. "Please, tell me everything about that disaster." They talked for the better part of an hour, Daniel sharing stories of theatrical mishaps and unexpected solutions, Patricia gradually relaxing further into the conversation, the tension in her shoulders visibly easing as she allowed herself this brief respite from the weight she'd been carrying. "Thank you," she said eventually, as Sophie began showing signs of tiredness that suggested it was time to head home. "I needed that more than I realized." "Anytime," Daniel said, leaning in gently. As Patricia gathered Sophie's things, preparing for their departure, she paused, looking at Daniel with an expression he hadn't quite seen from her before. Something searching, vulnerable, tentative. "Daniel," she said, "would you like to have dinner sometime? Not related to theater business or Sophie's curiosity about set design. Just dinner. As adults getting to know each other properly." Daniel felt something warm unfold in his chest at this invitation, a recognition that the connection building between them over these months had reached a point where both of them were ready to acknowledge it directly, rather than through the accidental proximity of Sophie's theater visits. "I would like that very much," he said. Their first proper date, several days later, confirmed what both had perhaps already sensed, that the ease of their conversations at the theater translated naturally into deeper connection when given dedicated time and attention. They talked for hours, moving from restaurant to a quiet walk after, sharing more of their individual histories, their hopes, the particular wisdom each had gathered through different forms of loss and rebuilding. "I need to be honest with you about something," Patricia said, as they walked slowly through a park near the restaurant, autumn leaves crunching beneath their feet. "That comment I made that first evening, about needing a father like you for Sophie, I didn't intend it as seriously as it perhaps sounded. But watching you with her since then, watching how naturally you connect with her curiosity, how patient you are with her questions, I think some part of me recognized something that evening that I wasn't ready to fully acknowledge yet." "I felt something similar," Daniel admitted, "though I think I was more surprised by how quickly I found myself thinking about both of you between our meetings, looking forward to Sophie's questions, to our conversations." "Is this too fast?" Patricia asked, her voice carrying genuine uncertainty. "I have a daughter who's already attached to you in her own way. I don't want to create expectations or hopes that might not develop into something real and lasting." Daniel considered this question seriously, understanding its weight, recognizing that whatever happened between him and Patricia would inevitably affect Sophie as well, that this wasn't simply about two adults exploring romantic possibility, but about a child who had already experienced profound loss and deserved protection from unnecessary additional disruption. "I think," he said, "that the only thing either of us can promise is honesty, with each other and with Sophie. Not certainty about where this goes, but care about how we get there. I'm not in a hurry, Patricia. I'd rather build this slowly and well than fast and fragile." Patricia stopped walking, turning to face him fully beneath the amber light of a street lamp. "That," she said softly, "is exactly the answer I needed to hear." They stood there a moment longer, two people who had each learned, in their own ways, that the most enduring things are rarely built quickly, that a compass only holds its worth because someone kept carrying it, kept trusting it to point true, long after the reasons for carrying it had changed. Whatever came next for Daniel and Patricia, and for Sophie, would be built the same patient way, piece by piece, conversation by conversation, evening by evening at a theater where the visible magic had always depended on the quiet, careful work no one else got to see.